Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. Well, quite often here on the show, we talk about soil testing and especially 0 to 6 inch soil tests. Well, today we want to talk about deep soil testing and just some of the issues we see in deep soils and how they can negatively or positively impact your yields.
Well, one other thing that really impacts yields is the defensive traits in the hybrids and varieties that you're planting on your farm. We're going to talk about some of those defensive traits and how to choose which ones are really going to help you.
Well, later in the show, we have a challenging weed of the week, but we'll help you on how to control it on your farm. We've also got an iron talk, but first, here's our farm basics.
The Grain Depth Guard from Farm Shop MFG has helped farmers keep their bushels safe from spoilage and shrinkage loss in bins all across the country. And this low-cost solution just became even more affordable. Farm Shop MFG is offering a $100 factory rebate on all Grain Temp Guard bin monitoring systems. This offer is available for a limited time only, so take advantage of this program now to upgrade your bins and protect your crop investments. For more information, visit farmshopmfg.com.
In our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about row spacing. Why do some farmers have wide rows and others have narrow rows?
All right, first of all, this is not the difference between 500 bushel corn and 200 bushel corn. Just switching a row spacing doesn't make that much difference for farmers, but it does make a significant difference when you look at the equipment that's going to be used out in the field, and also as you move further north in the country, when you have a shorter growing season. Filling in those rows quicker to catch all the sunlight is easier to accomplish with narrow rows.
All right, but here's the thing. There are a lot of different crops. And let's say that a farmer wants to raise 3 or 4 or 5 different crops. Well, is he going to match up row spacing with every single one of those crops? Maybe or maybe not. So let's take soybeans, for example, on our farm. We plant most of our beans now in 30-inch rows. Part of the reason why we don't plant them in 10-inch rows or 7-inch rows and what we would call very narrow rows is because we have a lot more disease pressure. When the rows are close together, then basically what ends up happening is more moisture is trapped in those rows. There's more humidity there. There's more likelihood of disease issues. And in our operation, we have a major problem with sclerotinia white mold and other soybean diseases, so we don't like narrow rows for soybeans.
Well, in corn, it really changes things when you go to these narrow row spacings about how the corn plants are going to be spaced out in the field. A lot of farmers think as they get to higher populations that, you know what, narrow rows are kind of nice because I can leave more space in between the plants, versus when I'm in a wide row trying to slam a lot of plants per acre out there, they've got to be really pretty close together. I do see the merit to that, there's no question about that, but there are some challenges with narrow rows as well, with stalk quality and how they're going to stand out in the field. So there are some trade-offs there for farmers to consider if they look at different row spacings in corn.
Now let's turn to wheat, for example. If you were going to put wheat in 30-inch rows, you probably wouldn't raise a lot of wheat. Wheat is a much shorter plant than corn and to some degree soybeans as well. So when you've got that short plant, you're not going to capture enough sunlight. You're not going to shade the row in. And if you don't capture the sunlight, obviously you've lost yield. If you don't shade the row in, you're going to have a lot more weeds. So there are a lot of disadvantages to wide rows when it comes to a short stature plant like wheat.
Well, unfortunately, if there are some benefits to one row spacing versus another, farmers really have to choose. They can't just switch up all their equipment to move from one to the other. They can't switch the widths of their tires and these kinds of things. So farmers really do pick one system and try and stay with it.
Well, yeah, but Darren, they will plant multiple crops. Like even on our farm, we do raise some wheat. Okay, well, we have to have different equipment for that versus the corn or soybean equipment. So that's the whole thing that Darren's getting at here.
It just adds a lot more expense.
Exactly. So there are many reasons why farmers will go to narrow rows versus wide rows, or the other way around. I mean, we look at wide rows on our farm as a big advantage, but some people think it's a big disadvantage. So it all depends on that farmer, his ground, his situation, and the crops he's raising.
Well, one of the considerations too that we didn't discuss is weed control. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed later in the show.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
Avoid dry run failures with the new Hi-Pro Force Field pump. Providing the ultimate protection, this wet seal pump will save you on costly in-season downtime to keep your sprayer running. Now all you have to worry about is the weather. Hi-Pro, helping you spray better.
Challenging field conditions often make harvest difficult. Can your corn head handle it? The GTS X10 corn head from Agra US is a rugged, cost-effective alternative to heavier, more traditional heads. Constructed of durable yet lightweight aluminum, the X10 puts less strain on your combine without losing harvest effectiveness. And it is 40% lighter than traditional heads, reducing field compaction in those less than ideal conditions. For more information, give us a call at 8334-AGRA US.
How much does your crop residue cost you? Over time, residue accumulates in your fields, building excess carbon levels and tying up your plant-available nitrogen. Residue also traps P, K, and micros and can take years to naturally become available to your crops. This is because soil lacks the diverse microbial life needed to break it all down. With Decomp, you can naturally restore life to your soil and allow the release of valuable crop fertility. Learn more about Decomp at eggbio.solutions.
Introducing the all-new Diamant Cornhead from Capello, USA. With a revolutionary design highly innovative for its class, we have painstakingly designed every component down to the smallest detail to maximize your harvest efficiency. This gives you unprecedented standards in operation and performance. To get a hands-on look at this beast featuring our new gray poly design, join us at the National Farm Machinery Show in Louisville, Kentucky, February 12th through the 15th. Capello, wherever you are, we are.
Find love and then give it all away. Find love, then give it all away.
We talk all the time about 0 to 6 inch soil tests, but there is some merit to running some deeper soil tests on your farm. We want to talk about some of the advantages to that today.
All right, there's a lot of deep soil tests pulled, Brian. I don't want to say that there aren't, but the problem is mainly they're looking at nitrate and trying to find leachable nutrients and seeing what's down a little bit deeper in the soil. I've seen more tests recently that also included sulfur to see is there sulfate that's moving down through the profile. I really honestly haven't seen much for boron tests deep unless it's a complete soil test. But targeting those nutrients is one thing. We're talking about something else here. When we look at deep soil profiles, we'd like to know what's in there for all nutrients. Now, I don't think it's something that you've got to do 1 acre grids down all the way to 2 feet or anything like that. But I do like to know in a few spots, at least out in my fields, what have I got down there for nutrition? Is there something I can count on if my root system needs to get deep in a dry year?
Well, you start talking about deep. What does deep really mean? I mean, when I look at soil in general, I find an awful lot of roots that are in that 6 inch to 12 inch range, maybe even 12 to 18 inches. So why are we only testing the top 6 inches? In the past, a lot of people have said, well, that's where a lot of your organic activity is occurring. You have a lot of oxygen there and everything else. That's great to say, but let's face the facts here. We have an awful lot of roots that are down a little deeper in the soil. It would sure be nice to know what's down there for nutrition. And spoiler alert here, when you do your soil testing, you're probably going to find there's not a lot of nutrition there. So what it's going to lead to is you're going to ask me and Darren, hey, help us figure out a way to get more fertility down a little deeper in the soil to better feed our crops.
Well, that's a good point, because as you look at placing fertility down deeper, it's probably not going to be accomplished by a broadcast application and a plow. It's more likely going to be accomplished by a deep strip till type or deep banded application. And we do see that happening in many areas where crops are grown. We've done some of that on our own farm too. The challenge here gets to be, how do you soil test and find those spots if you're just doing strips out across your field. But it's something over time, if you continuously do this, well, you're going to spread that out as you go across your field. You're probably not just going in the exact same spot every time. So over time it evens out.
So here's the thing, a lot of people are running these deep soil tests and only looking at nitrate and maybe sulfate. They're looking for leachables. I'm actually looking for the exact opposite. I want to find out how much of the non-leachables are down there. Because if they aren't there, I want to put them there. Phosphorus, zinc, potassium. I mean, just think about it. Phosphorus is the #1 water quality issue we have in the United States today. Phosphorus pretty much exclusively gets into water because of erosion. So think about this. If your soil moves, then the phosphorus goes with it because a lot of phosphorus gets applied on the soil surface. Well, instead, if you were to apply the phosphorus deeper down in the ground, well, now you better protected the phosphorus and you've got the phosphorus where the roots can get it.
The whole key with this, and it's nice to put nutrients down deep, but if we don't get any microbial activity a little deeper in the soil, it's going to be really tough to get a lot of activity there with root systems and everything else. So we've got to make sure we've got decent drainage out in our fields, and we've got to make sure that we eliminate compaction layers. If we've got compaction that prevents our roots from getting down to those nutrients as well, we're just out of luck. So take a look at those factors and then also look at the nutrition that's down deep, and it may be something that could take your farm to the next level.
So we've talked a lot about this nutrition in a positive way, but I want to talk about it in a negative way. One of the things that will show up on your soil test, if you run the test for it, is what's the pH level? Also, what's the salt level? Well, if you find that your pH and your salt levels are rising at those lower depths, chances are you have a drainage issue. Chances are you need to do something to get that corrected before it continues to move up and it ends up in your top 6 inches and causes an enormous problem for your field, your yields, and your entire farm and your economics.
So we encourage you, before your next crop goes in the ground, or maybe right after your next crop goes in the ground, do a little bit of testing deeper in the soil, but do a complete soil analysis, not just those leachables, nitrogen, sulfur, and maybe boron. Add in the non-leachables too, and start learning a little bit more about what could be done to improve your crops going forward.
Well, one of the things we know always improves crops is having great weed control, especially if you've got our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
How much yield and profit did you lose the moment you put your seed in the ground? A poor stand at planting keeps your crops from reaching their yield potential, and closing the seed trench behind the planter is essential to establishing a good crop stand. The Germinator Closing Wheel from Farm Shop MFG is here to give your crop the strong start it needs for maximum yield. Act now to receive an early order rebate plus free shipping. Get ready for spring planting with the Germinator Closing Wheel. For more information, visit farmshopmfg.com.
Tough, precise, efficient. Strip tillage with the Soil Warrior brings the future to your farm. Learn more at soilwarrior.com/agphd.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you want. In your life and on your farm, Case IH AFS Connect gives you more control. Monitor your operation, manage your fleet and your farm data your way. Case IH. Rethink productivity.
Do you feel like there's never enough time to get everything done before planting? The window for spring work is quick and unforgiving. Give yourself the upper hand with the ProTill High Performance High Speed Disc. More and more farmers agree the ProTill is the right tool for springfield conditions and heavy residue management. Zero maintenance bearings, independent disc technology, oversized pins and bushings allow the ProTill to handle whatever field or conditions you can throw at it. Degelman High Performance Equipment.
It's no secret that Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate with your schedule. Field conditions in recent years kept many from timely planting and fertilizing, and when you can't get your fertilizer applied, you lose thousands of dollars in yield potential. If you need flexibility in your fertility application timing, you need a drop tube system from C&R Supply. C&R drop tubes allow you to apply liquid nitrogen in season and place it exactly where your crop needs it. To learn more about low-cost CNR drop tube solutions, visit crsupply.com.
One of the most important things you need to look at when you're picking seed varieties for your farm is what are the defensive traits that I need, and are those defensive traits in the seed varieties I'm going to plant in my operation?
Well, the big thing, Brian, is to look at defensive traits that you just can't replace with crop protection products. For example, let's look at corn. I think about Goss's wilt as one of those absolute must-haves for me when I think about hybrid protection. If I don't have good varietal tolerance for this, I just can't stop it. There's no treatment for a bacterial disease like Goss's wilt that's been consistently effective. So I want to find traits like that I just can't replace. Now, let's say you have northern corn leaf blight tolerance and you have one hybrid that has a little more tolerance than another. That's a nice feature to have, but it's not a must-have for me because I can use foliar fungicides to protect my crop against northern corn leaf blight.
All right, Darren brought up an excellent and, quite frankly, the most important point. When can we not solve that problem with anything else other than the defensive trait of my seed? Well, a lot of times we're talking to farmers about soybeans, and people will say, hey, I have iron deficiency chlorosis, I have to have a great bean for it, and I'm going to agree with that if they have IDC. But here's the thing. Well, there may be no crop protection products that can solve the IDC problem. There absolutely are management problems that can long-term fix the soil, which will eliminate the iron deficiency chlorosis. So if you simply get your soil pH down below 7, iron deficiency chlorosis goes away. So all of a sudden now you don't even need that defensive trait anymore. So the reason why we're talking about this today is, yes, you've got to pick good varieties for your farm. You've got to look at defensive traits. But we also want you thinking about the long-term impact of decisions you make on your farm. If you just are renting ground, for example, okay, you got to just live with what you got. But let's say you own the ground. And let's say that you can get that soil pH down, so now you don't have to pick the very best IDC bean. If all of a sudden, instead of you can only pick from 5 different beans that are good on IDC, to now you can pick from 50 different soybean genetics that all could be good on your farm if you don't have IDC, well, who do you think's going to win? The person that can pick from 5 or the person that can pick from 50? So yes, we're talking about this today, and yes, we're saying pick good defensive traits, but we're also saying let's look at how do we long-term make a fix on our farm, make an adjustment on our farm, correct our soil on our farm, so we don't have to necessarily pick those defensive traits anymore.
All right, that's great, Brian, but again, we do farm in the real world here, and there are some situations that just aren't going to get fixed overnight. Even if you do have, say, a drainage problem, and that's great to get tile in the ground, but it's going to take several years for some of these problems to go away in most cases. I look at anthracnose stalk rot. Wow, has there been an improvement in varietal tolerance, but not every hybrid has got that. And if I don't have that hybrid tolerance, even with a great seed treatment, I just can't be 100% on anthracnose protection. So that's another one that I think is a real key. It's really stood out in 2018 and 2019. I think it's going to be a big factor on corn performance in 2020 as well. So having some stalk rot tolerance, especially to anthracnose, is another real key trait that I'm looking for. Now, when it comes to soybeans, boy, there are a lot of things there that really make a difference from one variety to the other. I do think the plant structure is an even bigger deal than most people are giving credit to. When I'm looking at soybean varieties, that's one of the biggest things I'm looking at. What kind of structure is it? Yes, it has to have yield. But once we've gotten that hurdle crossed, I want to look at what is my standability like? What kind of branches do I have? Are they big lateral branches or are they upright? For the most part, I like upright branching that holds relatively tight. That way I know that I can get some air movement through my plant. I know I can get sunlight down a little bit lower in the canopy. And what I'm seeing is I'm getting potting, not just at the top of the plant, but all the way through. These are things you can't buy and you can't replace with crop protection or fertility.
Here's the last thing I wanted to bring up. It's great talking about pick the right varieties with the defensive traits you need. But the problem is nobody knows how good these defensive traits are in a lot of cases because the variety is brand new. So you're totally counting on that seed company, And do you really think the seed company has all the background, all the data, all the information to tell you for sure this one is better on IDC, or for sure this one is better on anthracnose or sclerotinia white mold? Unless it's truly a resistance thing, then I don't know. I don't necessarily believe that all the time. So this is one of the reasons why we talk all the time about spread your risk, plant a lot of different varieties if you're planting mainly new stuff on your farm.
Well, I like the idea of diversification in many aspects in farming. One of them would be with weed control. We'll show you what'll stop this tough weed coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is brought to you by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont. Finish the fight against tough weeds with the Enlist Weed Control System.
Weeds are tough, but we're tougher. With unrivaled weed control, reduced drift, and near zero volatility. So, who's tough now?
Our Weed of the Week is a winter annual. It's prickly lettuce.
It's also known as China lettuce in some parts of the country, and I look at this particular weed, Brian, and it's one that we've seen for a long time. There are so many choices now on how to control it. It's not as tough as it once was, I don't think.
No, but you know, you say we've seen it for a long time. The reason why it's never been that big a problem for us in our operation is, quite frankly, it stays low to the ground. So usually crop canopy is going to choke this out. I would also say if you're doing tillage, well, a lot of times tillage will clean it up. We started seeing this as a much bigger problem across the United States when a lot more people went to no-till or strip-till. Then prickly lettuce started moving in, as did many other winter annuals like mare's tail and pennycress.
All right, so let's talk soybeans then. If you're going into soybeans, I love the fall treatments for any of the winter annuals. If you get some 2,4-D or dicamba out in the fall, depending on what type of soybeans you'll be planting in the spring, that works pretty nicely. I also like throwing some Valor or Authority out in the fall, but you could certainly use those in the spring as well.
Right, if it does get to spring and you still haven't controlled this weed, it's okay. There are plenty of options that will stop it in the spring. The challenge becomes, how big is that weed going to be by the time you spray? So if you're planting wheat first, then corn, and by the time you get to soybeans, well, now if that weed is big, yes, the normal things that you would think, oh yeah, it's going to control it, just like Darren is saying, okay, maybe it's dicamba or 2,4-D or even Roundup. Well, it doesn't work as well when that weed is huge.
So when it's cold, you're going to probably have to bump your rates up on products for the burn down. So if you're utilizing Roundup or Gramoxone or glufosinate as the core products in your burn down, you're going to have to go to stronger rates to get those to work.
And better adjuvants.
If you're using the 3 Pre's, I do like having the Metribuzin and the Authority or Valor in there. They do have some burn that could be used with one of your major burn down products to try to get some help on this weed.
Yeah, burning this down in corn, I'd run with Verdict, and in front of wheat, I would do Sharpen. When we start talking post-emerge, wheat, I'd probably run Husky. In corn, I really like Status, plus a little bit of atrazine, the best. And then turning to soybeans, well, all depends on your trait. Could be Roundup, could be dicamba, could be Liberty, could be 2,4-D, lots of different traits in soybeans.
And we would recommend using at least one of them. That would be the best way to get it under control. That's all the time we have for this week's Weed, Prickly Lettuce, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
Find love, and then give it all away. Find love, then give it all away.
There are a lot of steps to having a perfect season. Don't let your fertilizer plan be the step that trips you up. No matter when you apply fertilizer, no matter how, AgroLiquid has the experts and the products that'll help you move closer to your target and hit the bullseye. AgroLiquid moves you closer to your target.
If you're looking to expand your farm's grain handling, you want everything to be fast and efficient. The Quick Belt from Norwood Sales is your all-around grain handling solution. Our conveyor-based system uses an 18-inch belt and a 10-inch tube, which minimizes seed damage while moving more than 10,000 bushels an hour. That's fast enough to fill a semi in 6 minutes. Plus, our hood is designed to gently direct the flow of grain straight down, keeping your crop in condition. Keep your grain and your farm moving with the Quick Belt from Norwood Sales.
Every day, we rise. We face the pressure, the uncertainty. Sometimes the decisions we make seem as tough as the work we do. Let the Acceleron portfolio lighten your load with a powerful array of seed treatments, fungicides, insecticides, nematicides, and bioenhancers offered in select combinations to give you coverage with one simple decision. Looking for a little peace of mind? We're on it.
It starts with genetics, what you're made of. It takes agronomy. It's local. It's knowing your land and having the tools to put the right product in the right place. It's built on service with trust, grit, and determination. Because it turns out, what it takes to make the best product is a lot like what it takes to make a farmer. Golden Harvest, rooted in genetics, agronomy, and service.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whenever you want. In your life and on your farm, Case IH AFS Connect gives you more control. Monitor your operation, manage your fleet and your farm data your way. Case IH. Rethink productivity.
Why should you use a 2x2 placement of fertilizer in place of or even in addition to in-furrow? What about for crops like soybeans? I'll answer these questions and more in today's Iron Talk. On our farm, we really like pop-up or in-furrow placement of a small amount of fertilizer, and even more so for natural products like beneficial microbials. It sets us up for success to start the year and lets the desirable microbes dominate the space around the roots. We also like to have a way to add more fertility outside the furrow for a variety of reasons. First, corn simply can't tolerate as much fertility in the furrow as many growers are using. Soybeans, well, they can handle even less. Moving just 2 inches to the side and 2 inches below the seed, you can put a pretty good load of fertilizer on without creating a stressful environment for the seed. For example, on our farm in 30-inch row corn, we never want to put more than 5 pounds of salt in the furrow. That equates to 3 gallons at 1034 per acre. By adding the option of putting more fertilizer off to the side of the row, you can now put on about as much as you need without much risk of injury to the seed. Of course, you could switch to a safer product than 1034, but you still shouldn't put more than 5 pounds of salt in the furrow on a 30-inch row. Second, there are so many biologicals being used in seed treatments and in furrow, you should keep things like fungicides or insecticides away from them unless you know specifically that they're compatible. Having that 2x2 option allows you to do that. Finally, I mentioned soybeans earlier. The biggest thing holding most farms back from higher yielding soybeans is fertility. Adding a 2x2 system is a great way to deliver plant food where soybeans need it and keep the soybeans safe from too much salt. For these reasons and more, take another look at adding the capability of utilizing a 2x2 placement. The returns in soybeans may be enough to justify the system, but the flexibility it gives you in corn as well is a nice fit. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but before we go, I want to remind you again to check out the Ag PhD Winter Workshop schedule. Just go to agphd.com to learn more.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD TV show. We'll have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.